Let's begin with Unit 5, and this covers Chapter 4 in the text for federal withholding. So the two types of withholding methods that we'll be covering in this course are the percentage method and the wage bracket method. And so if payroll is automated, the percentage method is used to calculate federal withholding. The percentage method works with forms W-4 from 2019 or earlier, or from 2020 or later. If payroll is processed manually, then employers have the option to use the wage bracket method. So first, let's talk about the percentage method. And this method is used when payroll is calculated automatically. And there is a worksheet that must be filled out to calculate the adjusted annual wage. The percentage tables are used based on the adjusted annual wage and cover any amount of wages or withholding allowances for W-4 forms that are prior to 2020. And depending on whether the box in Step 2 is checked on the W-4 form, determines which column is used to calculate withholding. So here is an example of the percentage method tables that you would use to calculate federal tax in this instance. So we have two columns. So this is the column that you would use if the box in Step 2 is not checked. And then we have a column that you would use if the box in Step 2 for Form W-4 is checked. Next, let's talk about the wage bracket method. So this method can only be used when payroll is processed manually. This method only works for annual wages that are approximately $100,000 and if allowances do not exceed 10. If taxable wages and allowance exceed this amount, then the percentage method must be used from Section 4 in Publication 15T. The tables for the wage bracket method are separated firstly by year and depending on if the employee's W-4 form is for 2020 or after or prior to 2019. Withholding methods and tables can be found in Publication 15T, Federal Income Tax Withholding Methods, and here is the link that you will need to use, and you'll be using this link also to access the tables in order to calculate federal income withholding. But for this course, we'll be using methods 1, 2, and 3. So let's talk about the wage bracket method used for Form W-4 submitted in 2020 or after. The tables for Form W-4 for 2020 or after are separated by filing status, which are either married filing jointly head of household and single or married filing separately. The tables are then separated by pay frequency, which are either weekly, biweekly, semi-monthly, monthly, and daily. And here is a snapshot of the 2020 wage bracket that you would use for manual payroll systems because the wage bracket method is only used for manual payroll systems. And this particular snapshot is for forms W-4 form for 2020 or later. And as you can see here, here are the sections of married filing jointly, head of household, or single or married filing separately. And here is the adjusted wage amount. And if you fall within, let's say, for example, this bracket right here, then we can figure out the amount of tax that you have to have withheld from your paycheck depending on if you file married filing jointly, head of household, or if you are single or married filing separately. For those employers that process payroll manually, you can also use the wage bracket method if you have Form W-4 for an employee that is submitted in 2019 or prior. So this table accounts for allowances that can be claimed on the old W-4 forms to calculate withholding federal tax. And here is a snapshot of this table that's taken from Publication 15T. And so this one, we can just look at the wage amount. So we just have to look at the amount the employee makes. And this is for a weekly payroll period and for a person that is married. So let's say this married individual who gets paid weekly, let's say his paycheck for the week is $850, but less than $865. And if he has two allowances, then federal tax for this employee is $48 for the week. So which method to use? So this sums up what we've talked about earlier. So for forms W-4 from 2019 or earlier, you can use the wage bracket method for manual payroll systems. or you can use the percentage method for manual payroll systems for Form W-4 from 2019 or earlier. But if you process payroll manually, you do have the option to use the wage bracket method if the employer chooses to do so. So for Forms W-4 from 2020 or later and manual payroll, so the same thing applies here as well. You can either use the wage bracket method or you can use the percentage method, but you do have the option of choosing the wage bracket method for a manual payroll. So if you have a form W-4 from 2020 and you have an automated payroll system, then this means you must use the percentage method table. So now let's look at some examples of calculating withholdings. So for our first example, we have an employee who submits Form W-4 for 2019 with box 2 unchecked, and her payroll is calculated automatically. Her annual salary is $39,000 and her filing status is married, filing jointly with one allowance and a yearly standard deduction of $4,300. So how much is her federal tax? So in this case, we have to use the percentage method because her payroll is calculated automatically. So we do not have the option to use the wage bracket method here. So this is the snapshot that we would use from the table from publication 15T. So first we have to figure out her adjusted annual wage, which is going to be her annual salary minus her yearly standard deduction of $4,300. Okay, so she's probably going to fall within this range here. So let's take a look at that calculation really quickly. So if we have her gross annual salary of $39,000 minus her standard deduction of $4,300, this equals an adjusted annual wage of $34,700. So she falls right in this range here. So our next step is that we have to calculate the 12% over the adjusted annual wage that is over this amount, that is over $31,650. So once we subtract her exceed amount from her adjusted annual wage, this equals $3,050, and then we multiply this by the percentage by 12%, and this equals $366. So, but we still have to add this to the tentative withholding amount right here. So next, let's take a look at that snapshot again, just so we have that here. And so next we have to add the tentative withholding amount to the $366 that we computed on the last slide. And so we're going to do that here. And so this equals annual federal withholding of $2,341. So let's say that this employee, she is paid monthly. So we know that that equals 12 pay periods in a year. So now let's calculate the amount of federal withholding that she has per paycheck. So we have to take the annual federal withholding and divide that by 12 pay periods, and this equals $195.08 for her federal withholding tax per paycheck. So now let's look at an example of how to calculate federal income withholding with the new 2020 W-4 form. So we have an employee and his filing status is married, filing jointly, and he has submitted a 2020 W-4 form and box 2 is not checked. His paycheck is processed automatically and he has a semi-monthly pay of $1,208.63. So what is his federal withholding per pay period? In this case, we have to use the percentage method as his payroll is calculated automatically. And we also have to use worksheet 1, which can also be found in publication 15T from this link right here. So here is a snapshot that you'll find in publication 15T. So we know that our employee, he makes $1,208.63 per pay period. He's paid semi-monthly, so he's paid twice a month, which equals 24 pays in a year. So we have to multiply this number by 24, and that gives us his gross annual pay of $29,007.12. So now we have to figure out his adjusted annual wage. So we don't have any amount on step 4 on this employee's W-4, so we can just put 0 here, and that amount doesn't change right there. So let's go ahead and skip to 1G. So If the box in step 2 of W4 is checked, enter 0. In his case, it is not checked, so we have to enter 12,900 for this employee because he is married filing jointly. If he had another filing status, we would have to enter 8,600. But in this case, we'll go ahead and enter the 12,900. And so this amount has to be subtracted from his gross annual wage. And so that yields $16,701.12. And there are no other adjustments that we have to make here. He doesn't have any allowances claimed on his W-4. So his adjusted annual wage stays the same at $16,107.12. Okay, so now let's take a look at step 2. So this is, we have to figure out the tentative withholding amount next. So we have to enter the adjusted annual wage that we figured out on the previous slide. And so for these next 2 steps, let's go ahead and look at that withholding table again. So looking at his adjusted annual wage amount of $16,107.12, he's going to fall within this range right here. And so we have to take of the amount that the adjusted annual wage exceeds 11,900, so we can enter that amount here on line 2B. And so we have to enter the amount of column C on that row. So as we can see for column C for this row, that amount is 0, so we can go ahead and put the 0 here. And now we also need the percentage from this row as well. So we can take a look at this row, and we can see that it's 12%, it's 10%, and so that amount we can go ahead and put here. And so to get this number on line 2E, we have to subtract 11,900 from $16,107.12, and then that gives us this amount here on line 2E, which is $4,207.12. And now for this number on line 2F, we have to take 10% and multiply that by $4,207.12, and that gives us $420.71. And so by adding lines 2C and 2F, and there's no amount in 2C because there was nothing here, and so this number remains the same for $420.71. Now to figure out the next number right here, the $17.53, we know that this employee was paid semi-monthly for 24 pay periods in a year. So this equals, so once we take the annual withholding tax of $420.71 and divide that by the number of pay periods in a year, 24, this equals the tentative withholding amount right here. And so now we have to account for the tax credits, and in this case, this employee did not have any. And so we have to figure out the additional amount to withhold, and there's no additional amount that this employee wanted withheld from his paycheck, so that amount is 0 for this line. And so that equals a total withholding amount of $17.53 for this employee per paycheck. So now let's take a look at an example of calculating withholding with a W-4 form from 2019 for a manual payroll. So an employee has a W-4 form from 2019 on file, and payroll is processed manually. The employee's tax filing status is single. He has 2 allowances and is paid biweekly. His gross pay is $1,400 per pay period. So how much is his federal tax withholding? So for this example, since the employee processes a manual payroll, he does have the option of using the wage bracket method. So let's take a look at that table. So this is the method that we would use. And so this is the table that we would use. So let's take a look at, so you want to make sure that you are looking at the biweekly payroll period and for single persons. And so for the wage bracket method for W-4 forms for 2019 and prior, you will see the allowances. So we know that he has 2 allowances and his pay is $1,400, so he's going to fall within this range. Okay, so his pay is at least $1,400, but it is less than $1,430. So, and he has 2 allowances. So his federal tax withholding is going to be $105 per pay period. So Now let's take a look at an example of calculating withholding with a W-4 form for 2020 from 2020 for a manual payroll. So an employee has a W-4 form from 2020 on file and payroll is processed manually. The employee's tax filing status is single and is paid biweekly. His gross pay is $2,000. He did not claim dependents or extra withholding. So how much is his federal tax withholding? So this employer also has elected to use the wage bracket method, and he can do so because he processes payroll manually. So let's go ahead and make sure you have the correct wage bracket here. So you want to make sure that it is for a biweekly payroll system, and you want to be sure that you are looking at the amount if the employee is single. Okay, so looking at that amount, and we know that he makes $2,000, so he's going to fall within this range here, and he is single, and so his tentative withholding is going to be $175. However, there is no additional withholding that this employee wishes to claim that is not stated anywhere in the problem. So his tax, so his federal tax for each paycheck will be $175. So now let's take a look at an example where we have to calculate net pay for an employee. An employee has W-4 form from 2019 on file and payroll is processed manually. The employee's tax filing status is single, has one allowance, and is paid biweekly. His gross pay is $1,400. He has health insurance of $100 deducted from each pay period and 401k withheld at 6%. He has no state tax. What is his net pay? And in this case, we'll be using the wage bracket method. So step one, we have to calculate federal taxable income. So we have to take his gross pay of $1,400 and subtract his health insurance of $100 and his 401k withheld at 6%, which is 6% of his gross pay, $1,400. And that results in a taxable federal income of $1,216. And so for step two, now we have to find his federal tax amount. And so we have to make sure that we are looking at the biweekly pay frequency chart. And so we can go ahead and look up his salary range. So his taxable federal income is $1,216, and that puts him right in this range, at least $1,190, but less than $1,220, which yields a federal taxable income of $100 based on his one allowance. So now we can calculate his Social Security and Medicare tax withholding. And so this is done by taking his taxable federal income of $1,216 and adding back the 401k amount for $84 because 401k is not exempt from taxable FICA income, but health insurance is, so we can leave that amount out. And so once we add back his 401k into his taxable federal income, we have a taxable FICA income of $1,300. And so now that we have his taxable FICA income, we can calculate his Social Security and Medicare tax. So we take his taxable FICA income of $1,300 and multiply that by the Social Security percentage of 6.2, and that equals a Social Security tax of $80.60. And we do the same thing for Medicare. We multiply his taxable FICA income by the Medicare percentage of 1.45, and that equals a Medicare tax of $18.85. So now that we have all of his taxes calculated, we can figure out his net pay. And so that's step four, to calculate his net pay. So we take his gross pay of $1,400 and we take out his federal tax that we got from the chart of $100 and his 401k amount that we calculated at 6%, which is $84. And his health insurance was $100. And we have his Social Security withholding at $80.60 and his Medicare withholding at $18.85. So subtracting out all of these amounts will give us a net pay of $1,016.55. So there are other methods of withholding that employers are allowed to use for their employees. And so it's really up to the employer of what method they wish to use, but there are some regulations that they have to follow. So as long as the withholding amounts have to be roughly the same amounts as it would have been if they used the percentage method. So, and as long as the taxes stay within these parameters outlined in this table, then employers can elect to use another method of withholding of their choosing. So now let's talk about federal withholding for bonus pay. So this is a little bit different than what we've been talking about. So the supplemental tax rate is 22% for bonus payments, and state tax also have a flat rate for supplemental payments. So this usually is from anywhere from 5 to 6% on bonuses. So as an example, let's say an employee has a bonus pay of $500, and in his case, we'll assume that there is no state tax. And so the federal supplemental tax rate is 22%. So his federal withholding tax will be his $500 for his bonus times 22%, which equals $110. So that is the amount of federal tax that is coming out of his bonus check. And so to calculate the net pay, you need to figure, so you would just take the $500 gross and subtract his federal withholding, and that equals a net pay of $390. So you just have to remember that there is this supplemental rate to calculate bonus payments. So now let's talk about state income tax. So employers in states with an income tax have state payroll tax withholding obligations, and multi-state employment withholding may be governed by reciprocal agreements between states. So what this means is that an employee can live and work in another state. You are always taxed in the state that you work with. So, but some states have agreements with each other that state, even though an employee may work in a different state, they don't have to have the work state tax withheld. They can have the state tax withheld where they live. So that just makes it a little bit easier on the employee when they have to file personal state income tax. And so the majority of states do impose a personal income tax, and here are the following states that do not have a state income tax, and these states are listed below right here. So now let's talk about the forms that employers are obligated to file. So employers have to file a W-2 form, and this is a requirement if the employer is engaged in a business and provides payments to $600 or more for any individual. And there are penalties associated with filing Form W-2, and that is if you fail to file the form timely, if you're late in meeting the deadline, employees will have to pay a penalty for that. And failure to include required information on the form, and filing on paper forms when the employer is an electronic filer, and failure to report a taxpayer identification number. So these are all things that will incur a penalty for the employer. Additional returns that employers are required to file. This includes Form 941, the employer's quarterly federal tax return, and Form 944, the employer's annual federal tax return, and Form 943. So this is a form that employers have to fill out if they are agricultural employees. This concludes this presentation, and please be sure to contact your instructor if you have any questions.